Silencio se rueda. Buenas, bienvenidos a este vídeo de unplandivino.net, por así decir, y vamos a seguir con el taller del miedo, pero ahora tenemos más gente aquí, gracias, y vamos a saludar desde arriba, desde abajo arriba, desde el sur, que está en Patagonia ahora. Claudia, ¿qué tal?
Hola, gracias Iván, y contentos de ser más.
Sí,
gracias.
Y ahora también está Ana de Venezuela, ¿qué tal allí?
Hola Iván, bien, contenta de esta invitación y el tema es maravilloso. Gracias.
Sí, bueno, vamos a ver además que ahora están saliendo los temas mezclados porque son muy prácticos. El tema de la crianza de los niños, pues inevitablemente salen las adicciones de los adultos, de la vergüenza y la culpa. Acaba de salir una, ya la veréis, que ilustrativa con una niña pequeña también, pero ahora va a haber más parecidas. Y también está Marisol ya hacia el norte totalmente, desde México, muy temprano allí. ¿Qué tal?
Hola Iván, pues sí, también contenta y abierta para escuchar. Muy interesante.
Tenéis los pañuelos cerca y para
ya, en los Kleenex cerca ya todo.
Y si tenéis que retiraros a llorar o golpear cosas, pues ahí también. Y bueno, todo el rato respirando en la barriga, por favor. Así que empezamos.
Gracias. Sí.
Silenciaros los que queráis o las que queráis, y si yo veo alguna cosa, pero que sepáis que hay mucho ruido ambiente, que no es de aquí. En el taller hay mucho ruido y de niños que golpean, la grabación está mal grabada, entonces ya del propio taller, así que no os extrañe lo que pase. Vale.
And I just want to get back to that point about our addictions. We often stay in an addiction emotion, which are often quite painful to stay in, but we use them as a method of getting away from an even deeper and darker emotion within ourselves. So if you notice yourself doing that, start just recognising what you're doing as an addiction. So it's just the same kind of principle of an alcoholic going to alcohol, or a person who's feeling sad going to alcohol, and a person who's feeling they want to get away from their life to go to drugs. It's the same kind of feeling, is that we've just instead of using alcohol, we've used this other emotional addiction. Does that make sense? This other emotional addiction is the addiction to punishing myself, for example. So I might become addicted to punishing myself, blame and self-blame, because I don't want to feel the underlying emotion. Which we obviously believe is worse. Mind you, most of the time it's not actually worse. It's actually worse to feel the addiction for the rest of your life than it is to actually get into the underlying emotion. It's a bit like a person who becomes a drug addict. What's worse, the underlying emotion that causes the drug addiction? If he or she dealt with that, it might only take a week or 2 weeks of their emotional life to deal with that, and yet they stay a drug addict for 10 years. So which in the end creates more havoc? In the end, it's the addictions that often create more havoc. Dennis, would you like to? She's just got a microphone.
Okay, would illness be defined in the same way as an ongoing thing, staying within the illness?
And it can be an addiction. Illness certainly can be an addiction. It depends on what the underlying motive is. For most people, illness is actually the denial of an underlying emotion. So when I'm denying an underlying emotion, usually I will get sick, depending on what that emotion is. But you may actually also be addicted to illness in order to get approval, or in order to get love. And if that's the case, and we find ourselves getting sick over and over and over and over and over again, we need to look a lot more closely at how much we feel we're loved. Because it's highly likely that we're actually feeling very unloved. And we use illness as a way to get attention. And you know that there are many people that doctors nowadays sometimes call hypochondriacs. They always seem to be sick, or they always seem to be worried about some kind of affliction. Creating an illness is an extension of that in some cases. So it can be a mixture of those two things. Look, whenever I get sick, the first thing I look at is my denials. So just, not yesterday, but the day before, I had a very sore throat. And I was saying to Mira, it's looking like a good weekend coming up. Like I'll probably get sick over the weekend and maybe have to cancel it or but but what I did was I lay down for an hour in the morning on Saturday morning, because I still had the sore throat Saturday morning. And I just prayed to God about, all right, what am I denying within myself here?
Aquí añade, ¿qué estoy negando en mí aquí? O sea, oré a Dios sobre eso. Aquí ha tenido un desliz al revisarlo, no he incorporado esa. Pero vamos, está evidente. ¿Qué estoy negando aquí?
And it came very rapidly that it was to do with me not wanting to be loved. And I was denying some of those emotions that were underneath that. And when I just allowed myself even just to acknowledge that, my sore throat disappeared within a few minutes after that. So that's like, so yesterday I was fine with my throat. Does that make sense? Like it's just a matter of acknowledging sometimes even that this is the real state that you're in. Any other questions, James? They just wait for the mic. Thanks, James.
Talking about this I had a friend some years ago who came to me and told me that she, on the day before, she'd met an old boyfriend and one weekend when they were in bed together. And she drove around to her husband, but got more and more sore every week.
Yeah.
She knew she was going to avoid telling it.
Yes. Yeah. We had a friend recently in England who rang us up and said she got such a bad throat that what actually happened, she had to go to hospital. And diagnosed her with chronic hypothyroidism. And they told her that she'd have to be on medication for the rest of her life because of this particular problem. While she was in hospital getting these checkups, she went through some pretty big emotions because they actually at one stage thought she had throat cancer, and so she was quite afraid. Then, while she was in the hospital, she realised that it was actually that she had withheld telling her partner some things about an infidelity regarding their relationship. And she had a realisation that this problem with her throat was totally caused by her not wanting to tell him the truth. So she went straight home and told him the truth. And he had about 2 weeks of emotional processing to deal with after that, which he did. And because he had actually always thought that what she told him was the truth, and he'd always accused her of it. That she had told him before that wasn't the truth. And he'd always accused her of something more going on, but she would never tell the truth. And the reason why he was so upset was because he felt that she had to be threatened with death before she told him the truth. Which is probably true. But what happened is 2 weeks later, the same lady went back to the hospital to get checked, and the so-called thyroid problem that didn't exist at all. And they said to her, the doctor said to her, we don't understand, we double-checked all the tests the last time you were here, you definitely had this problem, we don't understand what's going on. There must be something wrong with the instruments. And, so they went down the track of, justifying it through that. But the truth is that within a few weeks, she created this illness just by not wanting to tell the truth. And then a few weeks later, after telling the truth, the illness was completely gone. So that just shows you the power that the body has to reflect the soul's denial of emotion. Now, does anyone else want to share?
Cody, do you want to come up as well?
No? That's no worries. I'm shaking all over inside with the fear I have about coming up here and saying this, but it's been in my heart for quite a few months now that my son, Cody, he really is an angry person. I know that anger is inside me, and he's only reflecting that. The realisation that I have about that anger comes from myself, my father, and I know that without wanting to really admit it, does come from God as well. it's when I go into my side of it, there's a lot of decisions that I feel that I've made in my life that hasn't turned out the way I thought they would have. And in a way, reflected on my looking at what I could do with my children and my relationship with my wife. It sort of reflects back to after listening to AJ and the tapes after this 7 months now that I know I have been very, very angry with my father all my life because I've been left out on a lot of things. He was an alcoholic up till 15 years ago, but now he's constantly on morphine because he's got a bad back problem. So he believes that he's got over it, but I've never felt that, and I've never been able to really, in my heart, forgive him, even though mentally I've tried so many times and I've been to self-development courses and come back and explain to him and how I feel about it and ask for his forgiveness, but I'm now realising that it's not him that needs to forgive me, it's myself. And also, the only way that's going to happen is by feeling it. I've been like a volcano for the last 3 months or so, waiting for this anger to explode. And I have a fear inside of me that I don't trust how I'm going to react to that. That's one reason why it's not happening. And the other one is a fear about what I'm going to be judged by other people when that does happen. I'm still shaking with fear of just having this experience of talking in front of a crowd before. I've never done that before. So it's not to so many people. Going back to the anger I have with my father, there's a lot that he put onto my mother, and also realised that my father wasn't a good father. And I've never really acknowledged that he was a good father. I always thought that he could have done a lot better. Leaving me out. Most times he always promised a lot of things to me when I was a child, and I'd wait up all night anticipation, waiting for that to happen the next day. And I very rarely slept those nights because I was so anxious to be able to spend some time with my father, and it never happened. He always found an excuse to let me down or why we couldn't happen, but on occasions he would take me. And that brought out a lot of fear because every time he did take me, he was flying drunk, and we'd go out and see the 35-knot winds or really bad places for a little child. But he felt that was fun, that was good. He kept reminding me that he did take me places. But I've never actually understood or acknowledged that to myself until now. So listening to Soul and the other little girl, to really face how I feel that's inside myself. So I thank them from the bottom of my heart about that. to be able to be opened up by a child, and the strength that I have is I don't want to. I don't want to continue on with this anger inside me. I know that that's not me. I truly know that deep down that's not who I really am. And I don't want that for my kids. I've already talked to them and cried with both my younger children about this anger and being a bad father, but I still knew that I didn't tap into that real deep anger that I have. And I also had, I always thought my mum, I was always still am very close to my mother. And I always thought that I really, truly loved her, but a fortnight ago I realised that I didn't love my mother like I thought I did as well. And the biggest problem that I found or I felt from her was that she overplayed me all the time. She was her special son. It was her first child. And just by not being able to express how I really felt as a child, I became shy. And I always thought that was my personality, but now I realise that it's not. It's what my mother actually put over me, or made me believe that I was that. And I was because I got into a lot of trouble when I was a child. I used to go and hide, sleep in cane paddocks, and they would be able to burn for hours because I'd have to find me first. Where I would be, or I'd get burned in the cane paddock, or I always was lucky that I had someone watching over me in my life that was God. They used to always help me, or bring me home, or make my parents aware of where I was at that time. So I was very fortunate in that sort of regards, otherwise I probably wouldn't be here today. But yeah, going back to my children, I know my son is a little bit shy and embarrassed about his dad, Stephen, and he's the main reason why I'm up here speaking about this and where I feel inside.
So can I interrupt you now?
Yes, sister.
And the anger that you feel. And firstly, could you let everyone know your name? Because you didn't.
Oh, my name is Brett Porter, and my son Cody.
Brett, where's Brett from?
I'm from in North Queensland.
Brett's travelled quite a few days to come here. Yeah, Brett, the first thing regarding your anger, the reason why you're getting into anger all the time is because there's a lot of childhood sadness that you don't want to let yourself feel. And you'd rather feel anger than sad. So one thing you need to do is pray to God about this issue of why you feel like anger is preferable. And you'll find that there's a lot of things to do with feeling powerless if you cry. So what's going to help you get through this anger yourself is to actually start seeing that you want to feel powerful rather than feel the powerlessness of crying. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, yes it does. Yeah. So rather than choosing to be powerful, you can make a different choice, and the choice is to be powerless. But you'll become almost addicted to the powerful emotion. Does that make sense? You know how the previous lady was addicted to the notion of self-blame? Yes. You'll become addicted to the anger. So if you can see your anger like a cigarette that you're reaching for every time that you feel sad inside of yourself. So every moment that you're angry, tell yourself this: I am sad and I don't want to feel it. I am sad and I don't want to feel it, yeah. Because it's the choice that you're making to not feel your sadness that creates your anger. Now, your son gets angry for the same reason. He's reflecting your choice to actually not feel your sadness. You will find when you start feeling your sadness properly, right, his anger will also subside. I sort of had that feeling that was the case. Yeah. Because I do feel sad about a lot of things. Yeah. Now you have actually identified in this discussion, you've already identified what you're sad about, but you're not letting yourself cry about it. You got pretty close then, and there's a few tears run down. But what you're going to need to do now is actually tune into those feelings that you have about why, and really just to let it flow. Make the choice to let that emotion flow, rather than going back into a powerful state or a feeling of power. So just for everyone, anger is your choice to feel powerful. Does everyone understand what I mean by that? Now, when you get angry, it is actually the indication that you are denying a deeper emotion. So ask yourself, what is the underlying emotion? And allow yourself to go to the underlying emotion. If you don't go to the underlying emotion, you will keep on going to this emotion of wanting power. And that emotion, wanting to feel powerful, is what causes so much damage to yourself and everyone else around you. So does that make sense? Yeah, so it's sort of related to
The sadness about being left out, not being wanted and not being loved. Yeah, you've actually also identified some sadnesses with your mother and your father. Yeah. Your mother you felt impressed by. Yeah. Like, you felt like you had to be a good boy all the time. Yes, with your mother. And then with your father, you know, you were constantly looking for his approval and wanting time with him and everything, and he never gave it to you. And there's some really, really deep core emotions about that in you that you're sad about. And allow yourself to go there. At the moment, what's happening is you're not allowing yourself to go into that childlike state. And actually feel that emotion. Does that make sense? Yes, I've sort of felt that that's been the case, but not able to acknowledge it and to allow it to actually feel it. Yeah. So the key thing right now is that every time you feel angry, to acknowledge that I'm denying my sadness. Every single time you feel angry, that's what's happening. I'm denying my sadness. Now, this particular situation, whatever the external situation is that triggered your anger, is just a trigger of the sadness as well. There's something that's sad about it, that you're finding sad about it. Does that make sense? And what you're doing is you're avoiding the sadness of this and going into anger. Well, it's an automatic process that this anger's there as a block, and I'm just going along with that because that feels just a normal way of actually progressing my life. That's right, yeah. So actually acknowledging that I need to use that as a tool to recognise the sadness that I have. Yes. Yeah. So in about a month and a half's time, I'll be doing a discussion on anger. And in that discussion, that's one of the things I will actually be saying about anger being the choice that we make to get away from that powerless emotion.
De nuestra emoción de impotencia. Especifica eso también, que aquí no viene.
So, with that discussion, whether you're present or not, if you can grab one of the DVDs of that discussion, if you haven't dealt with the emotion well, then you find that discussion has been quite well. Thank you very much. No worries. So really, you want to start? Yeah, let's start. So really, this issue.
Aquí es que bromean con que le dan una estrellita a los que salen a hablar, como hemos visto en las anteriores ocasiones, y aquí también bromean con eso. O sea, le ponen una pegatina en la camisa y eso.
With sadness and anger. Anger is actually the result of the fear of your sadness. Does that make sense to everyone? So every time you get angry, you are actually afraid of feeling a deeper emotion. It's a fear of a deeper emotion. Allow yourself to feel it. That's the key thing. Allow yourself to feel it. And anyone else want to add? Ray, you want to come up and then we'll...
Han preguntado si quiere abrir más. Vamos a ver.
Okay. I'd like to be dissected now. read about my impact upon my children, particularly my son Michael. I've had a lot of been working through, still seems like there's a lot there, trauma with my father. And recently I worked through issues about not being loved and feeling like I really so wanted to be loved and held and feeling safe and secure with a man. And I'm finding myself single once again after having 3 very major relationships. So they don't really want things right. But that's the relationship part of it. My concern is how that's impacting my son's feeling about being a man, and also my daughters. I have 4 daughters. Michael has a twin sister as well, Debbie, and I feel that my feelings towards men from my early damage, if you like, has had a negative impact on my daughter's relationships with the opposite sex as well.
O sea, creo que 4 hijos en total, que ahí estaba hijas en femenino, aunque quizá sí que tiene 4 hijas y un niño, Michael. Bueno, ahora veremos, no importa.
Michael came in just a minute ago and said, I'm trying to be strong to come up and trying to, oh no, it's not the right time. And then Michael came and said, just playing outside with Jeffrey, and Jeffrey gave a good punch in the groin. And I thought, okay, I better come up here. I met Michael yesterday, mate. Michael, do you want to come up here? I'll say what I noticed yesterday, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But it was really nice to meet Michael yesterday and to talk to you all. And what I noticed was that Michael has some emotions about, because he can feel your sadness about men and feel your real desire to be loved. And he actually fulfills that role beautifully. He's very sensitive to your feelings, and even I noticed the difference between him and his twin sister yesterday. Michael stayed with you all through the talk, and his sister went off, and he sort of expressed, oh, maybe he didn't really want to come, but he kind of felt your feelings. Like, oh, but it was really good to get out of the house, Mum, and so I could feel this sort of.
O sea, expresó que tal vez no quería realmente venir.
Desire him to make you feel good, because he can feel how sad you feel. Yeah. So that's what I noticed. Michael, do you want to say anything about that?
So what do you feel when Mum feels sad?
I feel like cheering her up.
Yeah. what's supporting and what's going on. Yeah.
Como vemos, parece adolescente, no quiere salir, le dará vergüenza. Parece ya más mayor que los anteriores.
Yeah, I just felt, you know, she doesn't go out much, and I just wanted to please her to go out too, and just listen to what she's listening to, and try and put that into my life as well. So.
Aquí se refiere a estas cosas de la verdad divina. Vale, son las cosas a las que va mi madre, así que bueno, voy a añadir esto también a mi vida, voy a incorporarme. Así que le vemos ahí en el taller.
So in a lot of ways, you're trying to make mum feel better.
Yes.
So actually, mum's addiction is you making her feel better. Does that make sense? Yes. And so the reason why that's mum's addiction is because she doesn't want to feel as bad as she feels when it comes to men. And that's related to, of course, as you went quickly, your relationship with your father. Make sense? Yeah. So now, what do we do with addictions? Well, there's a few ways we can stop addictions. One way, if you're smoking, there's a method called cold turkey. You've heard of that, right? Which means just stop doing it and see what happens after that and deal with it. So. One thing you could try to do, and this is something that would be trying, so it's not what I'd recommend in the end anyway. There's one thing you could do, is just every time you feel bad and you notice that your son Michael comes to you trying to cheer you up, you say to Michael, oh, you're trying to cheer me up again. That means I'm denying the emotion. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I'm denying an emotion because Michael's a male, you're denying an emotion of what you want from a male. So what you're projecting out is, I want to hope from a male, I want to hope from a male. So when it comes up, gives you a hug.
Yeah, been doing that a bit just lately, actually.
Yeah. Or you know, I want to feel good from male. I need to, you know, I don't have any male in my life, which is the thing you mentioned right at the beginning. So now Michael's going to be that male in your life for you.
That doesn't seem fair.
Well, it's not actually. Now, he feels good doing it sometimes, maybe. Yeah. Sometimes I don't feel that good doing it either, really.
No, sometimes.
Sometimes it feels a bit like a drag, but you need to have some of your own life. So this is the issue, is that when we do that as a mother towards our sons, or as a father, by the way, many fathers do this towards their daughters as well. So
when we do that, we set up this dynamic where now he is now going to have this role with women, this role of looking after a woman. Now that's going to be quite damaging for him later in his life, because he's going to attract a woman who needs looking after. And then he'll look after her and he'll feel that's love. So it's really important that you break this cycle now with your own feelings.
Que rompas, le dice a la mujer, ¿no? Que rompas este ciclo con tus propios sentimientos. O sus, si hablaran de usted, que yo siempre lo intento quitar para que se esté más claro de quién hablan.
So what are you going to do? You've heard all
I'm not really good. I get really mixed up when it comes to me.
Okay. As do we. What are you going to do then? What do you think is the best thing?
Well, what you suggested, I like that. Recognising when life is coming up, giving me a hug to recognise that I'm going through some sadness or some pain associated with feeling.
Can I correct you on that? Because you're not going through it. That's the problem. That's why.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so he's actually coming up to give you that because you're not choosing to actually feel the emotion.
Yeah.
You're projecting around to all the men around you. Give me a hug, rescue me. And he's the closest man around who comes up and rescues you.
Oh, I see. He's the only one I probably trust.
Exactly. So he does that. So what it actually means is you're shutting down the emotion. So he won't feel like he needs to do that when you own it. So often what we do is we start feeling the emotions. So, I start feeling like I've got no male in my life, right? So I start feeling that. And I don't want to go to the core of it, which is about my relationship with my dad. So I'm choosing to not go to the core. And in the choice, that particular choice, as soon as I make that choice, the projection of my son is going to be, you need to fix this for me. You're not thinking it in your head, but that's what he's feeling from you. That you need to fix this for me. Does that make sense? And
yes, it does. Although
Aquí esto significa, la respuesta sí lo hace, es sí tiene sentido, porque le ha preguntado ahí Jesús, ¿tiene sentido? Sí, tiene sentido.
I feel like I have been doing a fair bit of work on it, obviously not enough.
No, what you're actually doing is you're feeling the effect emotion, but not the core emotion. And you do want him to come and give you a hug. That's one of your addictions.
No.
Can you ever give me a hug?
No. Not under these circumstances, no. Now, can everyone see why? My addiction is, when I get this hug, I feel better as a woman in my relationships with a man. Right? When I get this hug's coming from my son, right? And I'm feeling better as a woman because, you know, if he's showing me love and he's a male and I'm getting love from a male. Right? The problem is all that does is feed the addiction.
Todo lo que eso consigue es eso, simplemente alimentar la adicción, se refiere a eso.
It's like going and getting a shot. You know, if you're a drug addict, going and getting a shot. And that's all it does to you, it actually keeps you out of the emotion. That's what it does to you.
So helpful to say to Michael, well, Michael, just recognise whenever you want to give me a hug, just say, Mum, you're loving your emotion.
No. See what you're doing now? You're actually putting the onus on Michael to cure your problem. That's no good. So why do you want to do that?
Oh, it's just a band-aid job, I guess.
Exactly. Why do you want to do that?
Ahí es las bandas adhesivas para las heridas, que aquí llamamos tiritas, a ver, eso en cada país lo llaman de una manera. Aquí ella reconoce, pese a las risas, como vemos, solo estoy poniendo solo bandas sobre las heridas, ¿no? ¿Y por qué?
I guess I don't, but I actually have been trying to get into these emotions to do with the bad. And
but let's be honest with it, you don't want to do it. You've been trying to do it, but your feeling inside is it's pretty scary, and I don't know if I can do this. That's the real feeling inside of you. Does that make sense? You feel pretty frightened about dealing with this stuff going down. So the first thing you need to do is acknowledge that. I'm really frightened about this stuff going down. I'm really frightened about how much is influenced my life. I'm really frightened about
how it's influenced my children's lives. Because they're already grown up women, the other three. I think, oh, that's pretty heavy.
So, Betsy, now you're entering into self-punishment mode, and we're getting out of the real core emotion again. The emotion is about that. So can you see how easy it is just to get out of this, these core emotions and straight back into the blaming emotions, straight back into the doing this. All the time there's a lot of self-judgment happening. This is why many of you are feeling quite stuck with processing emotions. Because what's happening is that you're getting back out of the core emotion and into these self-blame emotions or into self-punishment emotions, or wanting the addiction self-satisfied, which actually keeps you away from the core emotion. So in this particular example,
Michael comes to you to give a hug. If you actually say to him, don't give me the hug, you're actually lying to yourself. Because the feeling that came from you to Michael before that was to give me a hug. Does that make sense? So you would actually be lying to yourself to say to Michael, don't give me a hug, because the feeling coming from you is give me a hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when he comes to give you a hug, you have to acknowledge that I wanted him to give me a hug. That's my law of attraction, see?
Yeah.
I wanted him to give me a hug. That's my addiction. Just admit that to yourself. I wanted this hug. That's my addiction. Right? Why did I want him to hug me right now? What was I feeling just the instant before I wanted him to hug me? What was the feeling that I had that I'm trying to get away from? Ask yourself that. And you'll find in every case, it's a feeling about men that you were feeling. A feeling of being unloved as a woman from a man. You actually have quite good relationships with women, generally. Right? Better than you do with men.
Yeah.
Okay? So obviously the bigger addiction is going to be towards the male. And hence that's why, even though they're twins, Michael is the one responding. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So every time he comes to give you a hug, acknowledge, I wanted this hug from him. It would be wrong of me to actually say, don't give me a hug, because actually the feeling was I wanted him to give me one. And then acknowledge I wanted him to give me a hug because I was feeling, what was the feeling? Insecure, unsafe, whatever the feeling was that you were trying to avoid. Now that's the emotion that is the core emotion that you need to let step into. Does that make sense? It'll be really graphic if you see the trigger. It'll be really graphic for you to see the emotion. If you can look at what's going on the instant he does what he does. And the way you can help Mum, and you don't have to, by the way, because that's your call. The way you can help Mum is to only hug her when you feel like she doesn't want one.
That's like hard work to think about that.
Right, so because whenever she wants one, actually what you're doing is coming and actually helping her addiction. But it's not, but I must point out, it is not Michael's responsibility to solve this problem. It is the parents' responsibility to solve this problem.
Can I point out that because for Michael, what he's learning is the way I get love from a woman is if I suppress my own desires and put theirs before mine, then I get all these lovely feelings from the woman, and so then that must be love. if I do that for a woman, that's what loving is in a relationship, because that's what he's learning with his mum. But once you clear your emotions, it might be strange for him as well, because he's got this addiction of, if I make mum feel better, then I feel loved. So you're not going to be asking for him to make you feel better all the time either. But, like, yeah, so, yeah, that makes sense, yeah. But really, after that, when you're not carrying that big injury around, you will have hugs with your son. It just won't be based on this need.
So one emotion you may feel like when mum's going through this is you might feel like she doesn't want a hug from you anymore.
Una de las emociones que puede sentir es que ya no quiere más abrazos suyos. Aquí añade eso, ese matiz, que hay, luego lo añadiré cuando lo revise, sí, que me acordaré. Que ya no quiere más abrazos.
And you might feel unloved there. Does that make sense? Because you're so used to giving it. Yeah, and if you feel that, then just let yourself feel that and work through that issue, because this will really take a lot on your relationship with girls. So you don't want to keep getting girlfriends that you've got to look after the rest of your life. You don't want to do that. You want to get a girl who you've got a good relationship with and you can get along together with without having to look after her all the time, right? And that'll be a good relationship. So it's very good if you can work through this issue. You can find Michael how to work through that issue very rapidly. Yeah. Remember, if it's about your dad, feelings that comes, lack of safety, lack of security, lack of not being loved from a male, those kind of feelings. Every time, notice your behaviour, notice his behaviour as your law of attraction.
Yeah.
Remember yesterday in the talk we said that our children's behaviour is our law of attraction. Not theirs so much as ours. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that what meaning?
Okay.
You have a
It's
question?
a hard bit actually, just getting into and recognising that and going and dealing with it in this process.
Yeah. Yeah. At the moment, there is a strong desire in you to not deal with the underlying emotion. You're afraid. So while you're intellectually telling yourself, I must do it. I must do it for the sake of my children. I must do it in particular for the sake of my. I must do it for my own self. There's a feeling inside of you of fear about doing it. And if you can acknowledge those fears, it will help you a lot. In fact, this is where the fear list that I mentioned earlier is very handy, writing a list of all the fears about your relationships with men. Not just what you're afraid of from men, but what you're afraid of not getting from men. And let yourself deal with those, because underneath those are the causal emotions that you feel with your father that need to be healed. But if you can at least acknowledge every single time he comes to support you, many times it's driven by an emotion inside of you that you want his support.
The little question go down, but Michael's got in his mind that only to give me a hug when he feels like I don't need it. There's still going to be a law of attraction though, isn't it?
You are going to, because of the addiction, you are going to project at Michael, I want a hug, right? And if he doesn't give it to you, there's a high likelihood you're going to get angry in your current condition. So that's something you've got to be very careful of.
So that would be another thing I need to be aware of. If I get angry.
Then
with
Michael, then there's an issue here of you not feeling loved by a man now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's a denial of the lower emotion of not wanting love. Before, see, if he stops doing the addiction, you might finish up getting angry with him, right? Because you still want the addiction.
Yeah.
So what happens to a smoker when you take away your cigarettes for a day? What happens to a smoker?
I get pretty...
Like they didn't want to give up cigarettes. You take away the cigarettes for a day. Yeah. And that's what if Michael decided, no, today I'm not going to do what Mum wants from me. I'm only going to do what I feel what I want to do for Mum. That's going to trigger you quite a lot if you decide to do that. And if you feel anger towards Michael, that's another suggestion. Just denying my own emotion. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. If you just acknowledge those things, it will help you get to the underlying emotion.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you. No worries. Thanks, Michael, for your feedback. Does anyone?
Bueno, ¿cómo estáis? Luego van a salir más adolescentes, sobre todo, y va a salir el hijo de un largo rato, el hijo de Jesús, hablando sobre su experiencia muy interesante. El Tristán.
Bueno, vos consultas como para saber si seguimos.
Sí, yo ahora vamos a ver lo que hacemos, ¿no? Como llevamos muchísimo rato nosotros, voy a subir el primer vídeo que a lo mejor dura 40 minutos así, por si queréis, mientras me tomo una ensalada media hora, pues si queréis ver. Vale. Los que no habéis visto, Claudia también tendrá que reposar más porque lleva un buen rato y nosotros, ¿qué os parece? A ver si podéis, ¿no? Marisol y Ana de Venezuela en media hora, que me dará tiempo, espero, y no apago el ordenador porque el otro día me traicionó, que me tarda mucho, por la obsolescencia programada, tarda mucho Pero ahora vamos a comentar si os ha surgido algo así de alguna duda o de esto último, que ha habido un poco de lío. Bueno, la mujer ya hemos visto como la máscara de la risa, ¿no? Que todos tenemos ahí para minimizar las cosas, ¿no? Ella se reía y Jesús ahí con una sonrisa de oreja a oreja le decía, no, pero esto no está bien, esto de... Porque ella llegaba a preguntar, bueno, pero de vez en cuando un abrazo, ¿no?
Sí, pues no por las razones, ¿no? Las razones eran las que no eran amorosas, por las que quería el abrazo. Es la gran diferencia.
Y los niños, fíjate, como sin comerlo ni beberlo durante años, todos hemos sido programados en este tipo de juegos emocionales. Entonces, tu mismo sentido de ser tú misma, de ser individuo, está formado ahí, en este tipo de juegos donde esto directamente son tan simples, pero están ahí. ¿Y qué haces con eso?
Sí, pues es que nos enredamos mucho con la parte emocional. Como dice ella, soy muy buena, pero cuando se trata de mí, O sea, a veces no alcanzamos a verlo o a ir desmenuzando cada emoción, ¿no? Una que tapa la otra, que tapa la otra. Y pues sí es muy interesante y también muy fuerte porque subestimamos mucho todo este barullo emocional que traemos y pues que está haciendo que tomamos todas las decisiones y
Pero,
los efectos de esas decisiones, ¿no?
y lo que te decía, pero fíjate qué simple es. Si voy a mirar el PDF original de esa parte, donde ella habla de, porque es como muy cándida hablando de, no, no, sí, claro, literalmente ha traducido así, luego lo he revisado con el audio, pero vamos a ver si hay algún problema en esa parte donde dice, si yo soy muy buena, vamos a ver.
Iván, y yo tomé en cuenta que si bien esto es un patrón, que como bien aclaró Jesús, que lo hacen los hombres con las mujeres, hijas mujeres, y también lo hablan en el del procesamiento de las emociones de miedo, ahí ya le ponen el nombre, digamos, de incesto emocional, y que es frecuente madres con hijos varones y padres con hijas mujeres. También en mi caso, por ejemplo, se dio de que mi mamá lo comete conmigo. Yo no sé, digamos, no tengo para decir, porque la única relación que tuvo con mi papá, ella sería heterosexual, pero de todas formas, fui su primera hija, ella tenía una regla con la primera hija mujer, que tenía que convertirse en tu compañera para toda la vida, y ahí, bueno, uno comprende que va en contra del diseño del alma gemela, y además yo me sentí muy identificado con Michael en esta necesidad de estar todo el tiempo sosteniendo, y bueno, esa fue mi tarea durante toda mi vida casi. Quería contar nomás eso, que no es solamente, porque en mi caso lo pude ver, y después miraban las fotos, como yo siempre fui masculina,
Más que,
hermanos, 4 en realidad, aborto. Somos 3 hermanos vivos, hay un aborto, vivos, digo, 3 hermanos acá en la tierra, son 4 embarazos lo que tuvo mi mamá, pero en las fotos de los 3 hermanos, estoy yo, después está mi hermano varón, con el que me llevo 11 meses, y 5 años me separan de la última, que es una hermana mujer, y en las fotos de los 3, yo estaba vestida igual que mi hermano varón.
sí.
O sea, si él estaba en remera y pantalón, yo estaba en remera y pantalón, y mi hermana, la pequeña, estaba en vestido, con las colitas, el cabello, con los moños, la cinta de raso.
La proyección, claro, la proyección emocional de tu madre iría más hacia ti, porque a los niños, como tienen que ser menos emocionales y menos amorosos, no sé qué, pues a ti era la que te tocaba. Y además como la primera de las mujeres, ¿no?
Y la ira con los hombres, que venimos hablando de los otros videos, claro, y entonces ella dijo, bueno, como dijo esta chica claramente, es el único en el que confío. Y claro, mi mamá dijo, bueno, no tengo ira contra los hombres o les tengo miedo, entonces, bueno, voy a confiar en la hija mujer, qué bueno que tu hija mujer sea la primera para que sea tu compañera para toda la vida. Claro, ella dijo, no, los hombres no se puede confiar, voy a confiar en una hija mujer, pero me convirtió en hombrecito. O sea, como debajo, bueno, que el alma todo lo domina, digamos, esta distorsión se refleja en mi vida, porque después mis relaciones también fueron así
Sí,
como
y que
torcidas.
los niños no se enteran de lo que está, no nos enteramos de lo que está pasando, de lo que estamos haciendo, hasta que ahora, ya de mayores, que entonces podemos caer en mucha culpa, vergüenza, machacarnos de culpas y confundirlo todo. Sí,
Claro.
y son
Bueno,
muchos.
y durante el relato yo anoté que empecé a sentir muchísimo sueño, y eso que soy cuidadosa de no comer, por ejemplo, de no ingerir mucho como para favorecer la conexión, estar en el cuerpo, sobre todo esto, la somnolencia, acá son las 1 de la tarde, o sea que yo estoy despierta desde muy temprano, entonces ayudo, pero sentí un sueño muy fuerte, que sabía que había algo acá, en el incesto emocional, y después sentí un calor enorme, que sabemos que a partir de todo lo último que venimos recorriendo, el calor representa la vergüenza y la ira que en realidad estoy sintiendo y estoy suprimiendo, así que toda mi cara todavía me quema, que calculo que me sentí muy interpelada por esto, a diferencia de las otras que por ahí siento que con otras heridas he avanzado un poco más y las he pasado, pero esta está muy fuerte, suprimida.
Sí. Oye, bueno, pues eso es lo que pone aquí, realmente buena, pero realmente estoy como confusa así en lo tocante a mí, en lo que respecta a mí. Es un poco rara esa frase, pero literalmente es eso y así ha quedado reflejada. Pero luego podemos, al comenzar la siguiente, podemos, si queremos, incluso cuando llevemos ya un rato, volver a este caso, releerlo un rato o lo que fuera, y también ir a algún punto del esquema que se os ocurra. Voy a intentar eso, a ver si en 2 minutos subo el primero que hemos hecho antes. Y bueno, despediros, aunque apenas hemos podido hablar, pero ahora en la siguiente le damos más fuerte, y a Ana de Venezuela y Marisol y eso, pues ya comentamos lo que queramos, que aquí llevamos un buen rato.
Sí, está bien, Iván.
Vale, pues bueno, ahora continuamos. Ahora os comento.